So my name is Devika. I head South Asia for Ava Labs. If you don't know what Ava Labs is, we are the company that helps in the growth and development of the Avalanche network, which is a major layer one. So if you're excited about building, please kind of listen to what me and Nitin are talking about and come chat with me after about investments and grants, which is what I know 90% of people here care about.
Okay. Uh, I am Nitin. I am a partner at Antler. Excuse me. Antler is one of the world's fastest growing early stage platforms. So we do not just Web3, but other things. We're setting up far more dedicated of an effort around Web3. Currently, we have 30 investments across the world. I am the global lead for Web3, so I get to see what we are doing across the world. So some learnings there. And I also had our India fund. I've been in this venture business for about 15 years, and I think the reason I see so many familiar faces is I got very fortunate to be go down this rabbit hole and start backing founders in 2016, 17 onwards in India. So been very fortunate to see a few cycles and learned a lot about both the potential and the challenges of operating startups from India. And so I've seen multiple cycles, which is another way to say I'm an old guy. But hopefully we can share some of this with you, which would be helpful to founders here. Maybe just a quick poll. How many people are currently founders? Like they've started something? Okay, a few hands here. They're all sitting together. And how many people are developers? Okay, okay, many more, and they're more scattered. And how many people are sort of service providers to the industry? Okay, they're sitting at the back. Okay. And how many people are pure investors? Well, they're sitting in the front. Funny how this works, right? Okay, so I think what maybe we can do, Devika, is just start by taking a quick stock of history.
Yeah.
So, somebody was asking sort of what's next. I think it's helpful to look at how far we've come. I think the way I would describe it is, 2014 to 2018, 19, which is what I would call the first phase of India Web3. It was just about the fact that there were 3 exchanges. People wanted to buy Bitcoin. I used to do a lot of meetups, and I thought people were coming for the technology, but they all just came to find out what price should they sell at or buy at, which I had no idea about. And so it was a lot about just early exposure and much more about exchanges. And there were lots of exchanges that popped up at one point. Folks here may not know, they were at one point, they were like 15, 20 legitimate exchanges. Many of them were funded also. And I think that the phase after 2019 maybe is a phase 2. And I think a lot of credit goes to projects like Polygon and that ecosystem and others. And what we saw was that even if the regulation in India was not clear, talent from India could build platforms for a very global market. And there were only a few that became large, right? So there will be hundreds of startups, but only maybe 5 to 10 got some real global traction. Polygon obviously was very big, but you also had founders from India, Bioeconomy and Mudrex, which personally I was invested in, Juno, same, Persistence, a few others that I'm sure I'm missing. And there were some learnings about what kind of founders in India can actually build for a global market. And that's what I would love to talk more about, as to how we look at founders and which founders in India are able to expand globally. Because I always say this to people, the best thing about being in Web3 is you're global from day one. The worst thing about being in Web3 is that you're global from day one. Because you're not competing with the other projects in India. The benchmark is, and I'm sure Devika, you guys see this globally. The benchmark is, are you the best project in the world that somebody should bet on? So that was phase 2, right? Which was talent from India building for a global market. And I think we are now in phase 3, which is, while regulation has not moved, there is talent density going up. Electric Capital's report every year, I see the developer numbers go up. And India has become important enough for all ecosystems to be in. So that's where I want to pause, and we'll come back to this timeline. But as an ecosystem platform fund, Devika, how do you look at how important India is, what the opportunities are?
Yeah, I think for us, India is a very interesting market. right? We were looking for an India team, I think, for about a year and a half before we actually entered India. And we were thinking about entering India for a year and a half before we actually entered India. And there were some ecosystems that were here already. So, of course, Polygon is homegrown. But Solana had a little bit of a presence with Super Team. Ethereum had devs kind of working and getting excited about it. There really was no presence for us other than a little bit of community. And when we think about India, right, on one hand, there are these unbelievable numbers, and they're so enticing, right? As you say, the 12% of all developers building on blockchain are coming from India. The largest number of crypto traders globally is in India. You see all of these numbers. You see, thousands of technical universities showing up, and it's no longer the era of just the IITs, right? You have SRMs, you have VIT, you have PES, you have Centurion, like you have universities all over the world and all over India, right, that are building this kind of tech talent. So on one hand, you have this really exciting number, right, which is something that really feels compelling as an L1. You want to capture that developer audience. You want to capture the projects that are coming out of here. You want them to build on you, along with that, that comes a lot of education. You can't just come in as a fund and give money. You have to get people really excited about your L1 and your product. On the other hand, I think, for us, when we think about India and when we were thinking about India and we continue to think about India, it's also an extremely daunting place to operate. I think one, culturally, of course, it's very different from the rest of the world. So even now, when I talk to the rest of my global team, they'll say, well, in Korea, this happens in this way, which is the same that it happens in the US. Things work at X speed or things work with X efficiency. And India's, frankly, like it just doesn't operate in that way. The culture and the nuance here is quite different. And, you know, due to its size, there's also so much to sift through as an ecosystem, right? To understand what you should be backing, to understand what your community should look like. And it's very hard to build that in a cohesive way in a place that's not as small as Japan and that's not as small as Korea.
Yeah. So I actually want to zoom into that. So, I mean, you meet a lot of devs and startups. I mean, from your perspective, you've also spent time at OKX. Um, how in this phase, which I'm calling phase 3 that we are in, what are you looking for in terms of the kinds of projects that you find interesting?
We don't have, I think some chains, they might be very good at a specific kind of product, right? So your own gaming only chain or a DeFi only chain, or you have X product for X industry. I think for us, what makes us kind of interesting and why I really enjoy kind of working with Avalanche is that you can really build anything that you want because you have your own L1. So you're not dependent on our C chain to build your product unless you're in DeFi and you want that liquidity. So for us, when I'm really looking at what we're excited about backing, it's really like, are you addressing a gap in the market that exists, like truly? Or are you just becoming the third DEX on Avalanche that services the same community? Right? Like, are you doing something that nobody else is doing that addresses a gap that people want addressed? So not tech for the sake of tech, but tech for the sake of like addressing a challenge. And then does it make sense for it to be on Avalanche, right? Like just because we're here doesn't mean we want everybody to come build on us. I think, Soumya was here from base right now, right? We want people to build on different ecosystems based on what is the ecosystem strength and what you're looking for it. So for us, it's really like, are you building something that makes sense? Are you excited about us? Are we excited about you? Is it a good fit? So I guess let me play that question back to you as an investor on the VC side. Like, when you're thinking about investing now in India, like what are you looking for?
Yeah, I want to answer. I'm going to finish with the question I asked you also. Since you mentioned you see differences, right? I'm curious, when you're meeting developers from different countries, I mean, is there something that strikes you as peculiar about Indian teams, Indian developers, that something we do much better or much worse?
I think some things we do much better and some things maybe we don't do as well.
Yeah.
So I think things we do better is like understanding tech, right? I think at the end of the day, India is where it's at because we have such a strong like base of tech talent, right? We have all these universities. People are really getting in the weeds, and all over India, right? You go to Kerala and you'll see this happening in small universities there as well. Places you wouldn't assume, tech talent is kind of developing. So I think getting in the weeds, being able to build, yes. I think getting getting to commercialization, maybe we don't do as well. So we actually had a panel about this last week as well, where we discussed this. But I think once you build the product, like what do you do with it? right? How do you take it to market? How do you commercialize it? How do you get users? Maybe we haven't built that, I would say, that muscle as much,
Yeah.
when we go to say start pitching.
Yeah. Do you also, I'm going to ask a controversial question. Do you believe there is some racism against Indians in Web3?
I think there is not racism against Indians in Web3, and because so many major Web3 projects have been built by Indians. I mean, Solana is
Yeah,
Raj,
it's
and he's a brown
I mean,
guy.
it's like some people say it's a reaction to all that, like suddenly
Yeah.
people are,
I think it's everywhere, and I think there's a certain level of hesitation when people see Indian founders.
yeah,
And I don't think it's a Web3 thing,
yeah,
right? You go to Silicon Valley and you're an Indian guy and your last name is Patel and you're
yeah,
building a product, they're like, oh God, another one,
yeah,
right? But I mean, again, so it's the same as applying to college, right?
yeah,
You're an Indian person, you apply to college, you have 20 perfect SAT scores in the US, they're like, okay, there's another one,
yeah,
right? I think it's just harder to sift through the noise,
yeah.
again, with volumes, but I don't know if I'd call it racism.
Yeah,
Maybe,
I
yeah.
actually don't, I asked that, and that's why I said it's controversial. I personally think it's not worth thinking about. It's like, it's just a wrong way to think about it. I think great projects do find a way, and sometimes these are things we build in our own minds.
I guess let me ask you a
Yeah.
controversial question as well, which is when you have founders who come and ask you, right, for funding, what are the other biases that you might have? It's
Yeah.
not just skin color.
So, and this to your earlier question, so let me share my point of view, which is in this phase 3, let's say. Um, so the best way to talk about what you're investing is to look at your actions, right, not the words. So we wish we had done much more in India, but I'll give you a sample of what we've done as startup investments last couple of years. So LogX, how many of you are familiar with LogX? Okay, sorry. Chain Risk, which I am very, very bullish on. Musify, which used to be called Asset Money. Pure. And honestly, the way I would summarize my thesis on founders would be, I'm looking for 4 things in founders, and this is only my perspective, so none of this is investment advice, and different crypto VCs and mixed Web2, Web3 VCs will have a different take on it. I look at 4 things. In this cycle, I would rather bet on few founders who, like you said, are going technically very deep. So, if you meet the Chain Risk guys, I would say that I consider them crazy fast learners, and they were college dropouts from IIT Kharagpur, and I would say that they are as familiar with AWS Eigenlayer as anybody in the world, right? And so very, very few people who are going very deep technically, because I agree with you, that's the strength. The second is probably the most important, who can navigate a global ecosystem. I think Polygon became successful because the team led by Sandeep they had zero ego. They always say this, they had zero ego. They would just partner with as many people as possible. I know there are 2 different schools of thought about that, but I respect the fact that they learned to partner, and they were BD on steroids, right? Very few founders from India, especially if you've not lived abroad, right? I think that's a super hard thing to do. But I think that's where value will come from, because unfortunately, I would be lying to you if I said that India regulation is going to be better in 1 or 2 years. No one knows. There are smarter people like Tanvi in the audience here who can talk to you about that. I personally am not sure that we can bank on that. So to me, it's like who can go deep technically, who can navigate a global ecosystem, which comes down to how quickly you can build connections. And it's not about like community, Telegram groups and all, because everybody does that. Like to me, it's like who can actually get credibility with the sharpest thinkers in the space. And what I'm seeing with, for example, Chain is that. The third thing is who is in it for the right reasons. Sounds obvious, but unfortunately, I still think most people become founders in Web3. Not most, but still a large number, because it's one space where you can be rich before you've created value, and that's not a good thing. And I know that causes a lot of mistrust in the system, but I look for people who can survive multiple cycles. I've seen some of these successes, Mudrex, etc. I mean, they've gone through hell, right? They've survived because they just believed in it. They were in it for the right reasons. They weren't in it for a quick buck. So the only way you can survive these ups and downs of crypto is you have real belief and longevity. And the fourth thing is being nimble, uh, because I mean, everybody knows that narratives change, and you have to be very nimble as a founder too. So I look for these four things in founders, and that's kind of what's informed at least my decision so far.
So I guess let me ask you something. So I'm just curious, what percentage, and this is going a little off track, but what percentage of founders at Web3 have been women so far? Women.
What pathetic number, right? Embarrassed to say, I have not I have not even met many, frankly. We need to change that.
Honestly, I haven't either.
We need to change that. They're usually, I mean, I hate to generalize, but we need to move away from like they're in the community or marketing role. We need to have women founders as founders. And I mean, there are reasons for it. By the way, it's not a Web3 problem, as we all know. It's a Web2 problem also. And it's a much longer discussion and many deep causes for it. But I think one thing we can do is to have a healthier culture in Web3, and that goes through conferences, events, and parties. And I know for a fact that that itself deters a lot of women from being part of it. And I think nobody should be proud of that.
Yeah. So I guess.
Do you have a take on that?
Well, I think you're right in the sense that 90% of the times I'm the only woman in the room. I'm the only woman on the dinner table. I'm the only woman on the panel. And it can feel like a very lonely place to be. And if you feel like you don't, and I think especially in India, right, I think women are always taught ki thoda, in Hindi, like thoda piche raho, thoda chup raho, like don't fight for something, don't be aggro, don't be aggressive. Like, so I think it's very hard for a woman in India to be in Web3 and also then to be a founder, right? A role that's a little bit more social focus can feel a little easier, I would say. Where you kind of get a little taste of Web3 without having to take that risk. So I think, I actually personally haven't invested in a woman founder either, if I think about it. So, and I'm not sure how to change that.
No, I've invested maybe 12 founders in women founders in Web CEOs in Web2, but zero in Web3. So I'm embarrassed to say that, but we have to change that. Cool. So we were talking about this current cycle, and what's from your perspective, sort of, I know you're agnostic in the sense of building ecosystem, but what's most exciting from your perspective right now?
For me personally, I think what I'm really excited to see, especially coming out of India, is infrastructure around gaming and around like other kind of service-based products. So what I mean by that is, we're working with a company now. They have a booth outside, and they're building infrastructure for esports competitions without any integration, right? I mean, something that sounds quite easy, but no one's really done it, right? There's all this friction around esports gaming, especially Web3 gaming, Web3, tokenization of your own identity, so to speak. So I think things like that are quite exciting. I'm seeing a lot of that now coming into the Indian market. We're seeing advertising platforms come up, for example, growth protocol. So I think, supply chain, as we talked about. So I think building things that are really legitimate use cases, they could be building for India, like supply chain, or it could be building for the global audience, right? I think those are things that I'm really, really excited to see. I think because of the regulatory environment in India, I wouldn't be extremely bullish on DeFi yet. I think there are some DeFi platforms that are coming out of the region that are building for the world. But I haven't seen anything that's able to really build in India for India. There's a few, but limited.
Yeah. Maybe also since we are being candid, should anyone bother thinking about the Indian consumer, given where regulations are or will be? Or I mean, of course, we know there's lots of projects with users in India, but if you're meeting new founders, I mean, let me play the devil's advocate. Give up on building for Indian users.
I'd love to hear your answer first.
But I think you mentioned enterprises is something you are actually seeing interested in.
Yeah, so I think enterprises, it's a lot easier to build in India for India because you're not a crypto product. You're a blockchain product, right? Often they're using Avalanche because they want to build their own L1. They want to abstract away any gas fees. And they have their own token, right? So the token doesn't inherently have to have any value beyond 0.00001 or something. So if you have your own token, you have your own chain, you abstract away the gas fees, you're really just a Web 2 product in some ways where you're using Web 3 on the back end for data attribution, for consumer profile building, things like that, for airdrops, etc. So in that case, we're seeing a lot of building in India for India. I think when you go on the consumer side, it's so hard to attribute Indian consumers as Indian consumers if there's no regulation. If you don't want to KYC your users because you don't want to have to deal with the taxation system, how do you even know your users are in India or they're somewhere
Yeah.
else? So I would say you probably just have to build for the world
Yeah.
at that point.
I think maybe that's a good segue into, as we were talking, maybe the phase 4, right, is perhaps now we have enough crypto users in India who started their journey with buying some Bitcoin. Uh, they've done some trading. Some of them got to crypto derivatives also. And now they're actually becoming more sophisticated about staking
Yeah.
and so on. So maybe that's sort of what's also happening is that there are enough users in India, you can build something more. I know we were talking about Arna outside, right? Enough users in India who can actually give you a pool of people who are being more sophisticated in the way they allocate that capital.
So I guess as a VC, how do you view the Indian consumer as opposed to a global consumer? So if a project was coming to you
Yeah.
and one was focused just on the Indian consumer and the other was focused on, say, a Western audience, how would you assess them?
It's impossible to back something which is only focused on Indian consumer, right?
And
Unfortunately.
why is that?
Because outside of regulated or semi-regulated centralized exchanges, where I think that game is pretty much done right now, right? We know that there were 3 big players and now there are 2, uh, and maybe somebody can start a new exchange centralized and think that there's still more money to be made. But uh, outside of that, I don't think we are at a point where the as we are calling the more sophisticated, financial instruments, staking and yield farming, etc. I don't think there's a large enough volume yet. There's a lot of users, but the averages are still small. So I don't think it's a venture scale kind of outcome possible, right? You have to be building for a global user. Uh, there's the asset side, there's the application side. On the application side, I think somebody will build things, and maybe that's phase 5, where we will actually have people building application level layer things for India, and then maybe you'll have, whether it's RWA, for example. So India real estate, RWA, that could be massive, but we are too early right now for that, right? So maybe that's still, and that will require more clarity on sort of how the middleware for that is written and how the regulations, what happens if there is a dispute, what do you do in a court, does the court even understand what RWA is, and so on and so forth. We're far away from that. So I think maybe that's sort of phase 5 when the application level in India becomes interesting. For now, it's just asset, right? It's all the trading and more sort of yield farming. I don't think it's volume-wise large enough yet for an India focus.
So I guess, you had asked me this and I want to ask you this. So as a VC, what specific industries are you looking at in the next year when you think about your investments?
Yeah, so we tend to be agnostic. As I said, my belief, which others may disagree with, is that for us, it's backing the person. And this is a bit old-fashioned, but that's what we like to do, which is you cannot back one thesis as much as a great founder at the stage that we come in, at least. As we are always there, the very first, nothing is early enough. You might be in a job in Web 2 and leaving it, and you're tinkering with Web 3, that's fine for us. If you are fantastic, we'll work with you, get you funded, and get you going. So it's really about the founder. That's my first comment on that. I think in terms of globally also what we are seeing, so my perspective is different from what many crypto-native VCs might have, which is what's the big meta in the next 6 months? Which companies can we back and tokenize quickly and flip and make some exit in the next 1 year? More power to them. We are not structured like that. We actually are structured as a 10-year fund, so we take long bets. So for me, it's not important to see what will be 5x in 5 months. I care about what will be 100x in 5 years. So and like I said, the founders may pivot. As long as they're nimble, they'll work on around the right themes. But to give you some examples, I think RWA is something which will be inevitable, but it will take time. It's too important. I think the benefits of zero settlement, tokenization of assets are very clear to regulators, various stakeholders. It's just about the tooling needs to be built out and enough acceptance needs to be built out. Probably will happen. Maybe it's real estate, maybe it's supply chain financing, maybe it's trade receivables, etc. That's one. Um, Personally, very excited about what's happening in things like DeSci, decentralized science. How many of you have heard of DeSci? Okay, great. Uh, Disclaimer, I'm a very early investor in molecules, so I'm biased. But I love that kind of stuff because we are touching the so-called real world, right? Like intellectual property is a great thing that can fit this idea of like people investing, right? And if I'll take 30 seconds on why did it make sense to me in 2019? Because when I met Paul, he said, pharma is broken. Okay, it costs $1 billion to come up with a new drug. So what happens is that they end up funding Viagra because so many men need it, but they don't fund a lot of other molecules.
Like cancer research.
Like, yeah, important research. There must be some cancer molecule research therapies, etc., lying in some lab. Nobody's funding them. Or women's health, longevity, psychedelics, lots of diseases, right? And pharma will never go after it. It just won't work because they need $1 billion to develop it. So it's a little bit like the VC business. So we need an alternative funding mechanism, not just for pharma, but all of science. So I think I'm bullish on the idea that even if there's some things fail, even if you go and pump.science, etc., and you have fun and, like pump.fun and you lose some money, the point is that some of it could really fund important research, and that builds a lot of credibility, right? Because if you go to a regulator right now, what is the question they ask you every year? Show me something that has had real-world impact. And then the only answers we give as a community are stable coins, remittances, blah, blah, right? But they're like, wo theek hai, but give me like, it's just still money, exchanging money. Give me some real-world impact. So I think we need more things like maybe RWA bringing cost of capital down, maybe DeSci, maybe DePIN. DePIN I'm a big fan of. Again, question is which type of physical infrastructure. So as a theme, it's good, but the nuance is second level, which one works. So these are 5-year themes. I'm not suggesting anyone will make crazy money in like the next 6 months, but I think there are 100x's and 1000x's in some of these things.
So I guess...
and sorry, AI, of course, I forgot, is probably the biggest thing of all. So go ahead.
So I guess when you think about yourself as a fund, it almost sounds like you operate almost like a foundation fund, where the long-term kind of horizon, really thinking about what to build versus these quick exits. So if I was a builder, right, and I'm trying to figure out who to go to, which VC to go to, should I even go to Antler, should I go to a foundation? How would you tell them to think about it? And how would you tell them to structure the process in a way that they're getting the best, the best supporters?
So eventually we will have a separate Web3 fund and we'll cater to all types of founders, which was hopefully a next year project. For now, we are very good when people are taking their first steps. A lot of Web2 talent coming to Web3. We also need that, by the way, right? Like people who think that you don't need Web2 talent, it doesn't work because beyond a point, you need people who scale teams and scale products also. So I think some of that is good. But we have a lot of Web3 native founders across the world that we funded as well. I think our selling points are the global network. If you are in crypto, you're decentralized from day one. No matter where you are, you need employees, advisors, users in different countries. We are a decentralized network of 30 offices. We have 30 offices in the world. So the value that can bring is quite different from anyone else. Second, as I said, people who are making that transition, the first steps. And we are very complementary to ecosystem funds and Web3 native funds because our view is you start with us, spend the first few months, you don't even know if you need a token, go through that journey, create value, ideally first create utility and then tokenize, like Uniswap did and many others have followed. So those kinds of founders fit well with it. And then there are others for whom we are not the right investors, right? And there's plenty of capital for that.
So I guess one more follow-on question here. So I'm a builder and I come to you and I ask you, should I go multi-chain or not? That how would you think about this?
We leave that to the founders. I think we as you said, you have certain chains are better for certain use cases, and they also might require exclusivity. And that's a founder's call. And I mean, I think the future in general is going more multi-chain, right? So I think we don't really have a strong point of view on which chain that founder should pick. I think we leave it to them.
So I think we're at almost at time. So I'll ask you one last question, right? So if you were to summarize, right, the role of a VC here versus the role of a foundation, you've kind of talked about how it's complementary, but how would you, again, how would you ask an early stage founder who only is raising, say, $1 million to structure it and think about it? And how would you recommend that they think about their equity in allocating it amongst VCs and foundations, just given the different incentives that each player has?
Yeah, I think it can vary a bit, but it depends, first of all, on what is the right amount of capital to raise. So, everybody feels, especially if you are in crypto AI, and you might be like, oh, I should start with $5 million. Great. I mean, I have nothing against that. But you probably don't need that money. And if you get it from people who are very short-term thinkers, then you will probably not create long-term value for yourself, right? Because a lot of those people will be like, the minute you tokenize, you're like a public company CEO. You have 100 new headaches, and I don't know how many of those people want to stay longer to see the value creation. So I prefer that people start with, and I think there is a good correlation that actually people think if you raise a lot of money initially, you have more success. It's the opposite. More success actually comes from raising less capital early on, because it forces you to be frugal and more creative, and builds a stronger muscle, right? And then as you expand, you can double down on what you've learned. So I think $500,000 to $1 million is probably right for, especially if you're based in India, it's probably right for most projects. Anything above that is frankly, if you get it from a good investor, take it. If you don't take it from people who I believe may not be right long-term thinkers. And then how do you structure it in terms of, that's fund like ours just takes 9% of the equity, not tokens. And then usually it comes with a token warrant, which might have a ratio. And we're very clear in Web3. You do not want to be a large holder, because it needs to feel like
Decentralized.
far more collaborative, decentralized setup. And we love partnering with ecosystem funds, because they bring value which we don't. So I think I don't think we compete with ecosystem funds. I think we are, if anything, we're sort of super early to not even compete with most of the funds that usually want to do it after there is like some sort of plan to do a token. Most people don't even touch it if you don't have a plan to do a token, which I find ridiculous. So.
Yeah, I think the foundation is a little bit different, right? So I think, for us, we don't care as much about the token. And I think you were asking me, today, what do we care about, right? We really care about bringing users on chain. We want to bring every user in the world on chain. So more people on chain with the right use cases, and then getting more transactions on that chain, right? Because that's really where you're showing that your product has product market fit. So for us, when we're really thinking about products, we really prefer to actually invest in projects. Of course, if there's a project that's building on Avalanche without our support, great. But that, I don't know if I see that happening as much still. I think we're still quite early. And I think if you are building on Avalanche, we prefer to invest instead of giving a grant, because we want to have skin in the game as well, right? We want to help you grow. We want to make sure we're connecting you to the right people. We're helping you with our DevRel. Shout out to Ash. He's somewhere. He's our DevRel here. And making sure that you have the right support. So I think for us, we love to see lead VCs, but we also prefer to get into the round to make sure.
And I have one last quick question for you, which is, what do you think people do wrong in DevRel? And how do you guys think about it differently?
How do other chains do wrong?
Or in general?
Yeah, actually don't know anything about the DevRels of other chains in India at least, so I can't say. But I think what I've seen is that people don't have a big presence in DevRel in India. And that is maybe what I would say goes wrong, because projects everywhere need a lot of support in the early days. And especially when you're kind of onboarding onto a chain that's not Ethereum, like you might be EVM compatible, you might be in Solidity, but understanding how to actually migrate that product or how to build that product natively in your chain can be complicated and can be time consuming. So when a product doesn't feel like, a project doesn't feel like they have the right support, or the DevRel isn't as understanding or isn't as reactive, I think that's maybe when you miss out on the best projects. So I think, I would say, I think, we have a great DevRel team globally, and I think that's what we've done is set it up globally, but for local places as well.